Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Rabbi Leah here, bringing you Jewish news and views. The last time we had this program, which was just a month ago, it had been about 3 months since we had had it. And it was very, very difficult to boil down so much news and so much information that had happened over that 3 month period of time. And so it was a little bit easier this time, but I decided that rather than scouring my 85,000 emails that I get on what seems like a daily basis to figure out what I wanted to bring to your attention, I have just thought back over the past month at those events that I think are particularly critical at this time in our history. And so I decided to try to focus on these three topics. The first of which is Black Lives Matter, but particularly or very specifically, the Jewish involvement in this movement. Secondly, I want to look at something that is about to take place in Israel on the 1st of July, and that is the annexation of Israeli settlements. And when I was in Israel at the end of January and very beginning of February, that's when this annexation news was announced. And I was with a group of 34 rabbis from the United States, 34 Reform rabbis from the United States, and we happened to be with Rabbi Hera Person, who is the executive director of the Central Conference of American Rabbis, which is the rabbinic arm of the Reform movement, the arm that supports and represents rabbis. And of course, she was feverishly trying to get a statement out when this annexation was announced. And we had literally just come from the West Bank as part of our tour, visiting the most amazing Jewish, Israeli, and Palestinian cooperatives. And of course, this news came as quite a shock. And then, thirdly, I wanted to look at what's happening in Israel vis-a-vis COVID, the COVID-19 virus. So, those are the three areas that I want to focus on today. If you have other things that you would like to talk about, other issues for Jewish News and Views in the future, once again, I encourage you to send me emails, call me, let me know what those subjects are, and I will be happy to look into them and to see what I can find for us. First of all, Black Lives Matter and what the movement for Black lives means for Jews. If you joined me for Chai There with Rabbi Leah going back a few weeks, you know that I did a multi-part program on Black-Jewish relations in the United States, literally since the beginning of the colonies. And it's been a relationship that's had its ups and downs. And in 2016, it had some downs because Black Lives Matter, um, the organization, came out with a platform that had some anti-Zionist, pro-Palestinian, pro-BDS language. Now, it's important for us all to understand that Black Lives Matter, the movement, which is propelling so much of the protesting that we've been seeing throughout the not only the United States, but throughout the world, is different from BLM.com, Black Lives Matter, or .org, the organization itself. So I have an article here that was written by a young woman who uh, uh, I cut her name off the article and I apologize for that. But here's what she wrote. The Torah and Talmud teach the importance of justice, repairing the world, to not stand idly by, and the value of human life. It's why Jews across the country said they gathered, marched, donated, and spoke out against police brutality in honor of all Black people who died at the hands of police, including George Floyd, who died after a police officer knelt on the back of his neck for nearly 9 minutes. And I can't imagine there are many people who have not yet seen that video, unless, of course, you are living in some very remote part of the world. But it is an incredibly devastating and troublesome uh, video. Despite the coronavirus pandemic, people in almost every major city left the comfort of their homes to stand up for what they felt was right. LA resident Marnina Schoenwurstschaffer, 26, felt it was her duty to show up for others because it's the Jewish thing to do. Pikuach nefesh, saving a life. Tikkun olam, repairing the world. Tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue. If these are the things I'm teaching to my B'nai Mitzvah students, how could I not show up in some capacity this weekend? Schoenwurtschafter said. She attended a march near Griffith Park and said we need to continue to read and uplift Black voices and Black Jews. We need to let them know and let your own community know that you are no longer willing to be complacent in the face of racism. Kelsey Goldberg, 31, participated in the May 30th march at Pan Pacific Park in Los Angeles. Goldberg has been involved with social justice activism for several years, attending many marches, including the Black Lives Matter March for Michael Brown in 2014. This time around, she was surprised to see the diverse turnout, including the number of white allies. The sheer size of the crowd and how interracial it was, I had never seen that before in those numbers, she said. This one seemed to have a lot more white allies out. I know a lot of my friends showed up to this one. I'm not sure why this one struck a chord, but I'm glad we're finally here. She added, volunteers were handing out face masks, visors, hand sanitizer, food, and water. Local stores and restaurants, including Cantor's Deli, also were offering water from the sidelines at a march in West Hollywood. For the most part, protesters said it was organized, peaceful, and powerful. Unfortunately, those peaceful protests later turned violent. Police and military enforcement were called in to quell looting. Protesters reportedly were attacked, tear gassed, and arrested. It was also horrifying to see firsthand how violent and insecure the cops are, and how that insecurity fuels their violence, said 33-year-old Benjamin Shalom Rodriguez, who attended the protest at Pan Pacific Park. As a white passing queer Latinx Jew, anyone who passes as white, whether Jewish or Gentile, has inherent privilege in the USA, and we must first accept that privilege, not shame, and definitely not excuse it away before we can be true, committed allies for Jews of color and all people of color. And I just want to read the description of this 33-year-old young man again. Benjamin Shalom, that's his first name, Rodriguez, a white passing, meaning he is of Latin origin, but he has a very fair skin, so he can pass as white, and he is gay. So here is a gay Jew of color out protesting. And I think it's important for us to understand that Jews in the United States are no longer one homogenous group of people who all think the same way, believe the same way, are of the same sociological and economic strata, who are all white, who all live in the suburbs, who are all middle class or upper middle class. This trope does not exist anymore in the Jewish community. There is a very large group and growing group of Black Jews, Hispanic Jews, Asian Jews, Jews of just about every racial bent that you could imagine. There are now 4 Black rabbis, and I'm talking about ordained by the Hebrew Union College. So this is no longer, it is still a minority within a minority, but it is no longer shocking to see Jewish people of color in mainstream Jewish communities. He goes on to say, another person, 18-year-old Erica Gaston. We need and deserve to be heard. She is Black and Jewish. We deserve to fight for a change. There's no reason that after 400 years, we are still fighting for the same life that we were fighting for when we were taken from our native lands. Our own protest is being taken from us and is being used to silence us, as it always has been. Of the many local businesses damaged by the looting, a few Los Angeles synagogues were vandalized with anti-Semitic graffiti. California rapper Westside Gravy said this news hurt him as a Black Jew because hate groups tied to the graffiti and other looting during the protests were moving the conversation away from the main point of the movement and attacking his identity in multiple ways. I think a lot of people felt like I don't have a place in standing up for this movement because there is this active vandalism taking place against a place of worship. There are so many different white supremacists and far left anarchists who are trying to co-opt the Black struggle right now that we can't point fingers and say this entire movement to fight for justice for Black Americans is tainted by anti-Semitism, the rapper said. I think it's important to recognize that and not flush the whole movement down the toilet because of the actions of people who are harming not only the Jewish community, but the Black community. Another protester, Jenna Green, said, there is a painful, difficult process by which we are making ourselves something new. And that to me is the American promise that we have been working toward for hundreds of years. Naomi Ackerman, executive director of the Advot Project, took her daughters to Fairfax Avenue on the morning of May 31st to clean up before attending a protest in Santa Monica, which unfortunately also turned violent. Cleaning up Fairfax was a very bipolar experience. I think we need to take responsibility for a lot of things, and what we can do is help clean up, Ackerman, 56, said. People are mad and they are hurt, and there are reasons these things are happening. I work with people every day where this is their reality. Police brutality has to stop. In response to the violence, Los Angeles Jews for Black Lives Matter, Los Angeles Jews for Black Lives released a petition demanding a people's budget, opposing the proposed city budget allocating half of its general funds for a police force that terrorizes Black communities as well as the unhoused, undocumented, and other marginalized community, the letter stated. We call on our Jewish community and allies to honor our common humanity, but B'Tselem Elohim in the image of God, and affirm that Black Lives Matter. The letter written to Mayor Eric Garcetti said, and I found out recently, because I had no idea, that Mayor Eric Garcetti is Jewish. And during the protests in Los Angeles, when I saw him interviewed, he became very emotional and began to break down, talking about his own Jewish heritage. And it was quite moving. Political strategist and co-author of JOC's Count, JOC meaning Jews of Color, campaign, Jenna Green, noted that the country is going through a painful time right now, but it's necessary to make change. I think about how lobsters molt, like they basically lose their exoskeleton, and it's a really painful process of basically getting a new body. That's what it feels like America is going through right now. It's a painful, difficult process by which we are making ourselves something new, and that to me is the American promise that we have been working toward for hundreds of years. So, so this was an article written recently after some of the protests that we saw in Los Angeles. And on the 12th of June, the Religious Action Center, which is the social justice arm of the reform movement associated with the URJ, the Union for Reform Judaism, came out with the following statement. Reform Jewish Leadership Statement, Black Lives Matter is a Jewish value. Black Lives Matter is a Jewish value. Throughout the past 400 years, Black people in America have been enslaved, subjugated, disenfranchised, murdered, and discriminated against. From generation to generation, white Americans, including white Jews, have failed to own and end the systemic racial injustices on which the nation was founded, and instead have actively or passively perpetuated these injustices. Our Jewish tradition is replete with instances of moral reckoning when we are asked to be present and accounted for. Ayeka, we are asked, where are you? We respond with a full-throated, Hineni, we are here. As Reform Jews committed to the spirit of this teaching, we say unequivocally, Black Lives Matter. To affirm that Black Lives Matter is to commit to a human and civil rights movement working to end systemic racism against Black people and white supremacy. To affirm that Black Lives Matter is to recognize that we are a racially diverse Reform Jewish movement and that our diversity is a source of our strength. To affirm that Black Lives Matter is for white Reform Jews to pledge to be in solidarity with Black Jews and Black people from all backgrounds against racial injustice and to act accordingly. To affirm that Black Lives Matter is to recognize the imperative to live with complexity and know that we can be steadfast in our love of and support for Israel while working side by side with those who hold differing views and express them respectively. Respectfully. To affirm that Black Lives Matter is to accept discomfort, knowing that actions or inaction of white Jews have contributed to ongoing racial injustice. To affirm that Black Lives Matter is to move beyond allyship and commit to long-term solutions, both internally in ourselves, our own organization, and externally in our communities to disrupt and dismantle white supremacy. To affirm that Black Lives Matter is to move beyond allyship and commit to a long-term solutions, both internally in ourselves, our organization, and externally in our communities to disrupt and dismantle white supremacy. To affirm that Black Lives Matter is to acknowledge that Black people risk their personal comfort and safety every day in white dominated institutions, and that white Jews must commit to risking their personal comfort and even safety in the struggle for racial justice. To affirm that Black Lives Matter is to ensure that people of color can be whole, never expected to choose between aspects of their identity, and celebrate the multifaceted nature of humanity. To affirm that Black Lives Matter is to commit to individual and organizational anti-racist trainings, identifying specific anti-racist hiring practices and lay structures, and outlining goals around specific racial justice action steps. To affirm that Black Lives Matter is for white Jews to reflect on their own thoughts and behavior, to build meaningful relationships with Jews of color and people of color generally, and to work for reforms that will achieve real lived freedom for Black people. We affirm that Black Lives Matter. And as I said, this is the statement of the Religious Action Center in Washington, D.C., which is the social justice arm of the Union for Reform Judaism. I only read this to you. I'm not telling you whether or not I sign on to this document, to all of this document, to part of this document. If you would like a copy of it that you would like to have so that you could read it yourself, I would be more than happy to make that for you and get it into your mailbox. Just let me know. And unfortunately, this particular format for Jewish News and Views doesn't really allow for the kind of back and forth that I really love, for people to express their opinions and for a little argumentation and so on. But I present this to you, and also wanted to let you know that I did earnestly look for a a statement piece by from the conservative movement, and was unable to find it. I also looked for a statement piece from the various Orthodox um, organizations and could not find anything. So I brought to you the only one that I could find related to Jews and the Black Lives movement. Okay, as I said, if you'd like a copy of that, I'm happy to get it to you. So now on to our second important topic, and that is annexation of the West Bank and other parts of Israel and Palestinian occupied territories. Annexation of the West Bank or parts thereof has been proposed by some Israeli politicians since the area was captured and occupied by Israel during the 1967 Six-Day War. East Jerusalem was the first part of the West Bank to be annexed. It was de facto annexed following the occupation by Israel in 1967, and then through Jerusalem law in 1980. Israeli law has been applied to Israeli settlements throughout the West Bank, leading to a system of enclave law and claims of creeping annexation. In other words, many of these ultra Orthodox Israeli settlements that have been wending their way through the West Bank used to all kind of be in one area, and then a settlement cropped up here, and a settlement cropped up here, and a settlement cropped up here, and water resources began to be taken from Palestinian populations, and it has become problematic and has been called by some creeping annexation. Annexation of the Jordan Valley, first proposed in the 1967 Alon Plan, was announced by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in September 2019 as his plan, subject to the outcome of the September 2019 Israeli legislative election. And as we all know, the 2019 September Israeli legislative election was a bust. And that was September. We've had, I think, two since then. And the leadership of Israel is still somewhat in doubt, even though Benny Gantz seemed to leave, eventually give that up to Benjamin Netanyahu. However, Benjamin Netanyahu is now under indictment and going through trials. So who knows where all that's going to end. So here is what was proposed. There were three proposals made. The first was the annexation of Israeli settlements, meaning that, and Netanyahu and his right of center Likud party haven't really had a coherent stand on the West Bank since 2009. First, he endorsed a two-state solution. But now he stated his intention of unilaterally annexing Israel settlements in the West Bank. So the question remains, how do you annex settlements that are scattered throughout a large piece of land? It would be like saying that San Diego and Riverside and Culver City and Sacramento are four settlements that are now going to be annexed and still remain part of the United States, while the rest of California is going to be its own country. So this is the dilemma that we are working with right now. And on September 16th in 2019, Netanyahu said, "I intend to extend sovereignty on all the settlements and the settlement blocks, including sites that have been security importance or are important to Israel's heritage, including the settlements in Hebron." So the application of Israeli law is going to be made on those settlements and in the West Bank, and it is going to create all kinds of problems. I mean, if you can imagine living in San Diego or Riverside, and you are coming under the auspices of the laws of an entirely separate nation from where you're actually living. So I know that's probably a terrible example, but it explains a little bit how this is going to look. The second proposal was annexation of the Jordan Valley. And Netanyahu said that his government also planned to annex the Jordan Valley if they won the election. And he reaffirmed his previous pledge to annex all Jewish settlements throughout the West Bank, but said that such a move would not be made before publication of the Trump peace plan and consultations with President Donald Trump. So that brings in a whole different element here. Why Netanyahu felt it was important to speak to Donald Trump about this and call it the Trump peace plan, one can only speculate. But according to B'Tselem, an organization, 65,000 Palestinians and about 11,000 Israeli settlers live in the area of the Jordan Valley. According to Peace Now, the proposal includes 30 settlements with 12,778 settlers, 18 illegal outposts, meaning settlements that have not been given the kosher thumbs up that they are recognized and acknowledged settlements, 15 Area A and Area B communities, which includes 44,175 Palestinians who plan to remain under the nominal autonomous control of the Palestinian Authority, but surrounded by all of these other annexed settlements and communities that are considered Israeli. So once again, the area to be annexed is about 22% of the West Bank, 90% of which is in Area C, and 20% of the land is Palestinian owned. So once again, we have this enormous dilemma where we have tens of thousands of Palestinians living in an area of the Jordan Valley where they still anticipate being under Palestinian governance, and yet much of, or a significant amount of, that area is settled by Israeli Jews. I'm trying to think if I can come up with a better metaphor for what this is like. Okay. The day after Netanyahu spoke about this annexation plan with the Jordan Valley, he said that he had received a green light from the United States and Donald Trump administration, and the administration said that there had been no change in the United States policy. But the next day, there was international condemnation of the proposal from Palestinians, the Arab League, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Turkey, the UK, and the UN, the latter stating that any Israeli move to impose its administration over the Palestinian territory would be illegal under international law. So these annexed Palestinian communities would now become part of Israel. They don't want to live under Israeli law. They want to live under Palestinian law. But they would now become part of Israel. So several Israeli politicians from across the political spectrum and Hebrew media outlets describe this announcement as a political stunt for votes, with the former chief of staff and opposition blue and white member of Knesset, Moshe Ya'alon, saying that Netanyahu had been prepared to evacuate Jordan Valley settlements in 2014. So in other words, 5 years before this proposal, Netanyahu had been prepared to evacuate those settlements. Why now was he going to annex the Palestinian areas of the Jordan Valley into Israel as opposed to evacuating those Israeli settlements? What was the change? Okay. And the third piece is that the annexation of Area C. Now, in order to understand this, the West Bank is divided into Area A and Area B and Area C. Area C contains 60% of the West Bank's area and all Israeli settlements. So there are about 300,000 Palestinians in Area C, compared to about 2.8 million in areas A and B. And Uh, the idea was a unilateral annexation of Area C, meaning that once again, those Palestinians who lived in Area C, namely let's find the number again, 60% of the West Bank's Palestinian population would now be, actually, they estimate that 80,000 Palestinians live in Area C. That has been disputed, though. The UN estimates about 297,000 Palestinians. So we're looking at the possibility of those Palestinians now also not living under the sovereignty of Palestinian law, but being annexed into Israel and living under the laws of Israel. So um, it's a very contentious issue. U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, who, by the way, I saw speak when I was on this trip to Israel when this all came down, told Netanyahu's aides at a meeting of the U.S. Israeli Mapping Committee that it is examining areas that could be annexed, that the U.S. wants to implement a peace plan, not an annexation plan. So, um, so this is, and on May 28th, just 2 weeks ago, a little more, maybe 3 weeks ago of this year, Netanyahu said he was committed to annexing parts of the West Bank in July once a joint Israeli-U.S. team completes mapping the exact territory based on the conceptual map released by U.S. President Donald Trump's administration. So if you see this map, it is a hodgepodge. There are Palestinian lands here and here and here, and Israel is woven in and snakes through the rest. Which means if I'm a Palestinian living on the West Bank and I have family living in a part of a part of Palestine that is Palestinian territory that is now being annexed by Israel and claimed as Israeli lands. How do I visit that family? How do I get from one place to another? I've been living in the Jordan Valley under Palestinian control. Suddenly I'm under Israeli control. So it's a very, very difficult and contentious issue. There's been a tremendous amount of international response. Internationally, the West Bank is recognized as militarily occupied by Israel, though Israel would dispute that. They've created 200 Israeli settlements in the West Bank, and the Oslo Accords, which seems like ancient history, although it's not. This kind of a proposal would violate a two-state solution that was set forth in the Oslo Accords. Also, the permanent and day-to-day control of the civilian population by a foreign power, meaning the control of the control of the Palestinian population by the Israeli government, would be denying it the right to naturalize or participate in politics, is going to continue to perpetuate Israel's is going to work against Israel's idea of being a democratic state. Because in a democratic state, generally, the population, people have the same rights as one another: voting, paying taxes, government services, and so on. So, I wanted to read to you quickly, if I can, although I probably can't, just the very, very beginning and maybe the very last part of what, again, the Union for Reform Judaism and the Central Conference of American Rabbis have to say. And this was adopted in June of 2020, although statements have come out prior to this. And here's what they say. As a proud Zionist movement, we hold the value of Ahavat Yisrael, love for the Jewish people, the land, and the state of Israel, as core to who we are as Jews. Our abiding commitment to the security of Israel, to the special relationship between Israel and both the U.S. and Canada, to the Jewish and democratic character of the state of Israel, and to the importance of Jewish values in shaping our policies and priorities, lead us to express our alarm at the possible unilateral annexation by Israel of areas of the West Bank. We are prompted to speak at this time by the decision to include annexation in the Israeli government's formal coalition agreement and the prospect that such policies could begin to be implemented as early as July 1st. July 1st is next Wednesday, so in just a week. Whether referred to as annexation or euphemistically the extension of Israel's sovereignty, we believe any such act outside the context of a broader peace accord to be a fundamentally flawed idea that would cause significant damage to the state of Israel, to the special relationship between our countries, and to Israel-diaspora relations. Israeli confidence in any viable peace process has been greatly eroded by the persistence of terrorist attacks, by Palestinian leaders' rejection of generous Israeli offers in prior negotiations, by official Palestinian support for the families of those imprisoned or killed after carrying out terrorist attacks, and by President Abbas's threats to suspend all prior agreements, including cessation of security, coordination, and cooperation with Israel and the U.S. At the same time, our movement has long expressed overwhelming support for the two states for two peoples solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, while expressing deep opposition to the occupation, to the expansion of settlements in the West Bank, and to the oppressive treatment of the Palestinian population. So, Reform Jewry, progressive Jewry, whatever you want to call it, is highly, highly opposed. They say that annexation would have a deleterious impact on the Palestinian people. Annexation is seen by Palestinians as Israeli repudiation of the two-state solution. Annexation creates significant diplomatic risks for Israel. Annexation jeopardizes Israel's security. Annexation jeopardizes North American strategic interests and political support for Israel. Annexation will deepen the divide between Israel and North American Jews. Therefore, the Union for Reform Judaism and the Central Conference of American Rabbis resolve to, and then of course the statement that opposes the any unilateral annexation. And when these announcements were made by the Netanyahu government, this was absolutely a unilateral announcement. Palestinians had not been included in any way in conversation or negotiation, nor had that offer been made. So we can't say they would have turned it down anyway because we don't know that because the offer wasn't made. Again, I am mostly interested in reading this information to you. And then if you have additional questions, I am happy to uh, give you copies of these articles and also of um, the statements of the various movements regarding annexation and so on. Okay, now on to COVID-19 and Israel. First, some good news. A single dose of a vaccine developed at the Israel Institute for Biological Research protects Syrian golden hamsters against the disease, the paper says. A single dose of SARS-CoV-2 vaccine developed at the Israel Institute provides protection against SARS-CoV-2, also provided effective treatment against COVID-19, according to a paper published June 19th. So that was just a couple days ago. And I don't know what these Syrian golden hamsters are, but it sounds as if maybe they are a kind of uh, lab animal that's used in these studies. It said that the vaccine results in rapid and potent induction of neutralizing antibodies, and two groups of hamsters were used in the study. One group received the vaccine before being infected with the novel coronavirus, and the other group was not immunized beforehand. Hamsters that received a single dose of the experimental vaccination did not lose body weight, as did unvaccinated hamsters in the control group, and their lungs showed only minor lung pathology and no viral load, while the unvaccinated hamsters had extensive lung tissue damage and high viral loads. And we know that because of the horrific respiratory damage that is done by the coronavirus, by COVID-19, that many of those who have died and those who have recovered have nonetheless had significant lung damage as a result of the disease. So, um, people who've had to have lung transplants and people who are not eligible for lung transplants because their body's immune systems have become so weakened and ravaged by the disease. The article says, taken together, we suggest that it is efficacious and could provide protective vaccine. They noted that more than 90 vaccines are being developed rapidly in a variety of countries using a variety of techniques. And the Governmental Research Institute in Nes Ziona, which normally works on defense projects, has been directing all its efforts toward novel coronavirus research in collaboration with several partners. The vaccine candidate will now have to be tested on larger animals and finally on humans. And meanwhile, a patent application has been filed. So, it's a good thing. So many different countries working on this, private corporations, publicly funded entities, universities, medical entrepreneurs, and so on. So we're hoping that we have a vaccine. A cure would be wonderful, but a vaccine would be amazing. And as a proud Jewish American, I would love to see Israel be the ones to win the vaccine race with a vaccine that works and one that is has few, if any, side effects. Okay, my own wish. They are having a terrible spike in Israel of the coronavirus, considering they're halfway to a previous COVID record. They are seeing spikes, as are many of our states here in the United States. They are calling this the calm before the storm. And the Times of Israel had an article that said, and this was just from today, from this evening in Israel, which is only the morning here. With coronavirus spreading again in Israel, many medical professionals are watching the increase in cases with horror, and some are pointing fingers. With cases rising, Israel hit the halfway point toward its previous high of active coronavirus cases, and some medical professionals are reacting with dread as the situation unfolds. It's rather scary for all of us, Amer Elami, head of coronavirus care at Nazareth Hospital, told the Times of Israel on Sunday, just after receiving a message from the health ministry telling him to prepare to reopen COVID-19 facilities. Israel's active case count as of Monday evening, 4,940 active cases, is double that of June 7th. So in a week and a half, the numbers doubled. When the number doubles again, Israel will surpass the peak number of active cases, 9,808, which it hit on April 15th. Elami believes Israel is in the throes of a second wave of infections and could surpass its previous record within a few weeks, finding itself registering 1,000 new infections daily, with hospitals under significant pressure. While the current spike has been widely seen as dominated by light cases, meaning not intensive care cases or severe cases, hospitalizations are climbing. 2 weeks ago, there were 109 patients in hospital wards. A week ago, the figure was 133, and now it is 205. Israel's infection numbers had been dropping since the peak, but as June hit, they started to rise. The mood in hospitals these days is a far cry from 8 weeks ago, when the Israeli Air Force treated them to a special aerobatics show. As planes flew above to honor their work, health employees waved flags to celebrate Israel Independence Day, but also, it seemed, to signal victory against the coronavirus, with case numbers starting to drop as the country prepared to reopen schools. Today, the capsules that kept school children in small groups have been abolished, meaning that students, apart from some who are already on summer vacation, are staying in full-size classes alongside new steps that are being taken to reopen the economy. So evidently, when the Israeli schools reopened, the kids were in what they called capsules, or what we might call pods or clusters of small groups of kids. They've now reopened that to regular large classrooms again, a dilemma which we are certainly faced with right now as we are trying to figure out what's going to happen to our kids when they go back to school. The cabinet gave the green light on Friday for cultural events for up to 250 people, including theater and cinema, and wedding halls are open. Trains are running again. These changes leave Elami nervous. We need to close areas where there are lots of people, wedding halls, recreational places, and trains, which will all be problematic. Former Health Ministry Chief Gabi Barbash said that he fears mass infection and thinks that moves to take more steps back to normalcy mean that we are looking for trouble. So, does this sound familiar? Does this sound at all familiar? Um, there are those who are saying that They haven't gone through their first wave, much less are they experiencing a second wave. And these are things that we hear every day on our news programs and also from our epidemiologists here in the United States. He goes on to say, we're working 24/7 without asking whether this is a second wave or not. We're dealing with thousands of tests a day and putting a lot of effort into preparing for the winter. Virologist Ronit Sarid also took issue with the term second wave. Many people are talking about a first and second wave, but you can't differentiate. It's our way of trying to categorize things, but it's really one continuous event, she said. Um, she said that the spike expected, um, there was a spike expected when the lockdown was lifted, that there was an inevitable rise in cases weighed against other costs of continued intense restrictions like economic and psychological impacts. So nothing's different in Israel than it is here. We still have those that are saying it's more dangerous to stay closed. More people are going to die if you stay closed. They're going to die for a lack of money because they're out of work. They're going to die for psychological reasons. You're going to have higher suicide rates. And there are those who are saying there's not going to be anything to come back to if we don't stem the flow of this virus now. And the only way that we could do that is by staying at home, keeping our kids out of school, quarantining, testing, wearing masks, all the things that that we've been talking about here. So I want to see if Israel has, in the last couple minutes that we have, um, has a law about masks in public. And I'm not talking about Purim masks. So let's see if I can find anything. Due to heat wave, Israel temporarily lifts mask requirement in schools and outdoors. That was back on May 19th. But on June 9th, 2020, the Times of Israel reported that Israelis ditch masks even as massive studies say that they cut infection risk by 85%. So it appears that Israel is having the same problems we're having here in terms of compliance, in terms of getting people to wear their masks, in terms of making sure that people stay away from one another, and so on. And I'm glad that those of us who are at Seacrest are living with certain rules and regulations that God willing, or God only knows, have kept us safe and will continue to keep us safe as we move through the coronavirus towards hopefully a cure or a treatment. So, 3 interesting topics today: Black Lives Matter and 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 Jews, and where Jews are on the subject of Black Lives Matter and the movement for racial equity. Secondly, the annexation by Israel of certain parts of the West Bank, which is due to take place in just a few days. We'll see what happens. And finally, a little bit of an update on what's going on in Israel with respect to the coronavirus. An Israeli company that is having success using a vaccine on which they're working in hamsters, soon to be brought to large animals and then human beings to make sure it's safe. And finally, looking at some of the same trials and tribulations that the democratic nation of Israel is going through with masks and distancing and schools and so on. So I'll wish you lahitraot for now. If you would like copies of any of the articles which I've referenced today, shoot me an email, send me a text, call me up, whatever you'd like to do. Grab me when I'm on campus, and I'll be happy to make you copies so that you can read the information for yourself. In the meantime, lahitraot. I'll see you again tomorrow morning for Jewish News and Views. Take care. Bye bye. I take that back. Not for Jewish News and Views tomorrow morning, but for Hi There with Rabbi Leah Thursday morning at 9:30. Take care. Lahitraot. Bye bye.